Tell us a story about you building a home in Nicaragua.
Well, that was a great trip. That was probably the most favorite trip of all my travels around the world, working around the world, traveling around the world. I think that the Nicaragua trip was by far my favorite. So we went to Nicaragua with our church group, and we went there specifically to build a home for a family in Nicaragua. Now, we don't choose that home. The people there choose who they want the home built for, but then we paid for it, and then we went down and helped build the home in Nicaragua. And at the time, my son came with me. My son was 9 years old, and I don't think they even, we didn't even ask them if a 9-year-old could come on the trip. We just sort of put him on there and paid for it and brought him down, and I think they were a little shocked when we got there that he was only 9 years old. Um, but the other thing is somebody in the church, before we went, for several months before, said, hey, they really need baseball equipment in Nicaragua, specifically where we were going. And they said, can you bring baseball equipment with you? Well, at the time, my son was playing baseball. And this was a woman in the church who told us this, and it made total sense because Nicaragua, baseball is the number one sport in Nicaragua, not soccer. Like in a lot of other, say, South American countries, Central American countries, it's soccer. Well, in Nicaragua, it's baseball. Baseball's huge. And so we said, perfect, we play baseball. So my son asked all of his teammates for equipment that they were done using. And we deliberately put together a full team of baseball equipment. So 9 gloves, baseballs, we put together. The toughest thing was getting catcher's gear. I had to buy some of that gear because nobody had it to donate. So we put together a batting helmet and bats, a full bag, a big duffel bag of baseball equipment. So we ended up going to Nicaragua and we started working on the house. And it was just so much fun. We're working with the local people. We were outside of Managua, and we were working outside of actually the city of Leon, not Managua, but Leon. And so we're probably a 30-minute drive outside of Leon, very rural place. And we built this home for a woman. It was actually a single woman with a couple kids, and that's who they had chosen to build the house for. And she would make us lunch every day, and my son was working on the house. I mean, just working on bending rebar and mixing cement. And we stayed in this home. We stayed in like a hostel. So every night we would play dominoes together and we would play baseball with some of the local folks. And it was just an absolute great trip. But we kept saying, well, what about this baseball gear? We carried all this gear down here. And so we asked the woman who was organizing the trip for us in Nicaragua, when are we going to give the baseball gear to the whatever team it is that we're giving it to? And she said, we were kind of wondering why you brought baseball gear. We didn't ask you to bring baseball gear. Like, why did you do it? Who told you to bring this baseball equipment? When I said, well, so-and-so in our church, who she knew, asked us to bring this baseball gear. She goes, we don't have any team that we work with. We actually only work with women. And so we don't have anywhere to give that to. We're like, oh, well, we just carried it all the way down here. It was a pain in the butt carrying this, through the hotel and everything. So anyway, we said, okay. Well, the next day we were back out in the field, and we get a phone call, or we get a call that a pastor of another church, it was a Catholic church, we were a Lutheran church, this Catholic church wanted to talk to us about the baseball equipment. And so we said, okay, so we had to drive all the way back into town, and he met with us because he was leaving and he wanted to really talk to us. And so he said, I have a baseball team that has no equipment. And we're like, we have a whole team worth of equipment. And he's like, that would be perfect. You know, we don't have anything, and we want to put a team together, and we've been using, you know, just makeshift equipment. And so we presented him with this equipment, and we were just like, it was so much fun to then see him. They gave it to the team, these young kids. So it worked out, and it was a great trip. And so based on that trip, you know, one of my missions about working in real estate is to hopefully build houses in places where people don't have decent housing. So that's one of the missions of what we're doing is, and the pandemic has really interrupted this. So after the pandemic, because you couldn't go and work directly on these places anymore. So we're trying to identify a place we can go to help build a house or get involved, maybe a school or something like that. We'd love to go and do this again somewhere else. We're actually going to Alamosa, and we're working with a group there doing some local housing assistance. And so I think there'll be some videos on that, on the work we're doing down there. So that's one of our missions. And if anybody knows anything on what maybe we could tie in with another group, we're looking for another group to work with, hopefully international, so we can make another trip like that. It was a beautiful trip, and I love working on houses wherever we can do it.
Did you ever Google if there are any MLB players came out of that town?
I doubt it. You know, seeing how they were, but you know, that's a funny question, because while we were in Leon, the World Series of Nicaragua baseball was there, and so we took a trip. We took a trip into town, into Leon, and we all watched. They had a whole screen set up in the street for everybody in town to watch the game. It was really fun to go into town and watch this baseball game. And they are very good. This was their professional baseball league. And so we had a great time, you know, checking that out. But I'm not sure about the kids that we gave the equipment to.